Well, welcome to the Church Explained podcast, a conversation to grow your leadership and build your church. Great insights, great answers there. And I think just summing that whole idea up, it's around that sense of celebration, that we want to celebrate what people are doing rather than what people were doing during the pandemic. And even before then, you know, people choosing sides and knocking one against the other. There's something powerful about just celebrating what people are doing. And I think if leaders can get that into their... That could, for me, is the biggest takeaway. But also, I think if churches look at maybe they're in the hundreds or the thousands, that actually they can have it all. They can be all those three things that you've mentioned there. They can be attractional, they can be communal, and they can be intimate as well. And maybe they should be thinking through all those, which bits are we strong at, which bits do we need to sharpen up on, because all those things together are a picture of what the church is. Even from the Book of Acts, isn't it?
And that's a great. I mean, that's a great thing, and maybe we'll come on to how we kind of thought to apply that a little bit. But I think another reason that I didn't mention, which I've not talked a lot about, but it's worth mentioning on this podcast. Another reason people did that polarization was because of what was happening in the church worldwide. We saw some big churches collapsing. We saw some prominent leaders, well-known leaders falling. That's always happened, but when it happens in a pandemic, it's like everybody sees it. When it happens in a world ruled by social media, everybody sees it. And I think lots of people got disillusioned with that, disappointed with that. They were heroes of the faith that suddenly perhaps didn't seem as heroic to people as before. But the reaction people had was, well, let's just dismiss that. Let's just dismiss that kind of thinking. Dismiss
the sort of churches they're from.
The sort of churches
and that's the danger, isn't it, really?
Which tended to be, because of their prominence and profile, tended to be what people would call more attractional. On the more attractional end.
But there's so many churches out there that actually, and this is the thing I think we got to celebrate. There's so many churches out there where leaders aren't facing those issues. And they're not, they're not falling off the side, if you want to put it that way, but they're going for it. And we often focus on the few, don't we? The few leaders that we've heard about. But like, what about the thousands, millions of leaders
Well,
just getting on with it?
That's what makes the news, isn't it? That's
exactly.
what, you just, Twitter. You just go on Twitter and you just scroll through your feed and you can instantly come off depressed because that's what it is. That's what piques people's interest, is the bad news or that stuff that, as has been said, that sells. So obviously we've gone through this, but it's not just been, we've done a bit of teaching and that's it. We're actually beginning to apply it and beginning to apply it in our setting. And so I wondered if you'd just delve in a little bit of how we've applied that, because it's great in theory, but there's a practice to it and how we begin to do that.
Yeah, well, like I said, we wanted to not just take this idea and say, that's great, it's a good mentality for us, but how do we respond to that? Because, for me, it felt like a strong... It was something I mused on for about 18 months, I think. I kept quiet on and said very little about. I mean, the first thing is that I wanted to say to our church, three things really that are given, is that one, we are Spirit-filled. We call that charismatic. We rely on the Holy Spirit. We believe in the Holy Spirit, the infilling, the gifts of the Spirit. We're Spirit-filled. Secondly, we're growth-minded. We believe that Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. Still believe that's it. And you might want to call that evangelistic. We are growth-minded. We want to reach people. And the third thing, we want to care for the communities where we live. We want to have an impact, to make a difference and care for people. But practically what we then said is we said, well, we want to have 8 ministries that are strong in the life of church. And some of these ministries, we might say in our current context, they're strong already, but we had the sense they could become stronger. In terms of looking at the early church, the Book of Acts particularly, even our strong ministries could become stronger. And then there were other things maybe we were not so strong in that we could build strength into. And the 8 ministries that we identified were teaching, our creative ministries, which is like all our production, our worship, everything, kids ministry, and ministry to families, youth, pastoral ministry, discipleship and leadership development, prayer, and then governance, finance, and administration. And we said those 8 ministries, we want to build strength and build more strength in those. And so we literally, created a, again, sorry if you had a bang, I just hit the microphone. We created a platform, a framework that we're asking leaders of those ministries to work through to make them strong, so that there's practical application that we can keep revisiting, and we can keep asking the question, how are you going in developing strength in that ministry? How is that ministry developing? Are we getting stronger in terms of our teaching? Is our creative worship production, is that getting stronger? Is our governance getting stronger? So we wanted to be able to monitor, if you like, the progress that we wanted to make in those areas.
I wonder if you'd, because we've developed this and it's 8 ministries, but actually we did something as a church years ago. It wasn't 8 ministries. I don't even think I was involved in leadership when you first started doing it, but it was less ministries. I wonder if you could just talk into that, because there might be a church that's thinking, okay, how do we start it? But we don't have 8 ministries. Where did we start when we thought about this, when we did this previously?
And I think for us, in a particular period of time, this was one of the most effective things we did as leaders to develop leadership skill and develop the quality and of the things that we were delivering as the church. We called it a balanced ministry model, and it's since been renamed Healthy Church model. And what we did back in the day, we identified 4 areas, and those areas were Sunday services, they were kids and youth, they were community activities, and they were administration. And we just, in each of those 4 areas, we asked the question, in the next 12 months, what would success look like? And I know people get worried about that word success, but what we meant for that, what would strength look like? What would progress look like? That was our thinking in those areas. And then we set some targets. So if it came to Sunday services, for example, we'd set 4 targets and say, well, if in 12 months' time we'd achieve these things in Sunday services, we'd sorted out some of these maybe problems that we felt we wanted to change, that would be success if we did that. And so we would identify 4 things in each of those categories.
Correct.
We would outline what the success looked like, and then we would create an owner. We'd say, you're responsible for that. And then over the period of 12 months, we would meet 3 times. So every sort of 3 months, we would meet and say, how's that going? How's that developing? And we discovered, when we first started, by the end of month 7, we'd done everything. We set our targets and our goals too low in some of those areas. And then we did that. I think we used that for a period 5-6 years. It developed, it grew bigger. We went from 4 quadrants, I think, to 7 areas where we would then do that same exercise. And we did that, and that caused us to be able to move forward in our skill, in our ability, in our leadership, in our quality of service as a church. And I guess what we're doing now on the back of this is we're revisiting a version of that that's focused on these 8 ministries that I mentioned.
But it has some of the key elements still in there.
It does.
In one sense, like you've got people who are responsible for those areas. And that's a big thing, just to have somebody earmarked who's going to drive that forward. And then, of course, you've got some other measurements in there, haven't you? You've got like the BHAG there, the Big Hairy Audacious Goal that you encourage people to think about. What else is on the list? I mean, we'll put it in the show notes, I think, for people.
Sure.
If you're happy for that to be shared. But we'll put it in there. we'll strip out our information as a church, but we'll give them the bones that they can take that template and work with.
And we can give them the balanced ministry or the healthy church template as well, because I think it's now what we've done here is make it 2-tier. So what I'm going to describe is, if you like, tier 1, and then what I've just described in terms of those specific targets is the outworking of it, which is still required. So we've identified these things. First of all, ministry leaders, like you say, who's going to be responsible? Who's going to lead this ministry? The name. What's the BHAG, which is BHAG, the big, hairy, audacious goal? I had to be careful there.
There's different ways to say it, isn't there?
So in that ministry, what is the big goal? What are we really trying to achieve all the time? Then the next is, what would be some immediate wins? What is something we can do like super quick within the next 2 or 3 months that actually will be a big win for us, moving that forward? Have we got any training needs? The next area is, what are our training needs? What are our opportunities for training? The next area is relationships and mentors. Who in this area do we need to connect with, or who do we need to learn from in this moment?
And that could be both internal and external, couldn't it?
Internal and external, and then the last one is like, who's next? And who's next is in every area. We want to continually bring in people through, new people into ministries and new people into leadership. And then that we have 2 segments which actually lean on to the application. It's 2022, what would success look like in the last half of this year, the last quarter of this year, as we're in now, and then 2023, what does success look like? So again, that would be then coming back to that next layer that I mentioned earlier. What's the 4 things that we can do in 2022 that would give us success? What's the 4 things we could do in 2023? So
very helpful, that, isn't it? For I think for a lot of church leaders, even the explanation of that, I think, is useful. Can I just pull out a little bit there on that sense of the who's next? Because I know that's a big part of our language really here at Icon Church. But I think it's great language, because we've been using 2 phrases recently, haven't we? Who's next? And the other phrase we've been using is like widen the circle. I wonder if you could just mention something about that, because I think that would be useful for leaders even at this time, even though it's slightly off topic, but they are connected, I think.
Well, maybe on the who's next, you tell the story about from like youth and
so when we started youth, I used to work for the network of churches ground level, and we used to travel together, and on pretty much most journeys, one journey a week, I would get asked the question, who's next? And it would be very much who's a young leader who's coming through, who have you seen, who are you looking for, who's around, really. And I think we want to have that mentality of who's next, who's coming through. It doesn't have to be a young leader.
Could be anybody.
It could be anybody. I have a thing where it's the faithful, available, teachable, and like we had a prayer meeting last night before recording this, and just looking around again, because that's one of my things is who's at the prayer meeting, because that's like, okay, they're here, they're invested, they want this, and so then you get a sense of who's next, and it might not just be who's next to take over the big role. We put ministry leaders on there. It might not be for those guys, but it might be who's next to take some level of responsibility in this area. You talk about that second layer and ownership on certain key things. When we were talking about the balanced ministry model and you had an owner, it could be who's next who could own this area to see this move forward. And so that being constantly in our language of who's coming through, who are we seeing? I think that's really important, because we can get so caught up in doing things. And sometimes even as leaders, we think we have to do everything. But we can see, no, who's next? Who could I empower? Who could I lead through?
And I think that faithful, available, teachable is key. I think as well with who next, you're thinking, who can I see God's hand on? You know, who's got some spark? There's something about them. You know, whatever it is. So it's identifying. You think there's something potential. You can see that gold. Shimmering in a person, and you think they could be next. God could be using them in some area, but then they widen the circle. Is let's not have closed circles. You know, whether that's a team or let's break the circle and invite other people in and bring other people in, and then they become the potential people who we might be looking at in 6 months' time or a year's time and thinking they could be next. But if we keep our circles closed, so I've just been trying to encourage our teams, encourage individuals, just keep widening the circle, just keep inviting people in, and sharing ministry, sharing the load, sharing responsibility and opportunity, and so those two things are slightly different, but they link together powerfully. I think
they do. And we even recently here we wanted to restart again after the pandemic, like our ministry to 1 to 4 year olds. We call it Goo Tots. I have to get the name right because there's so many goos out there that we do, but Goo Tots. And that was an opportunity for us to widen the circle. It was an opportunity. There's a new ministry to get some new people who are around church involved, and it's been given that. And even within that, we're identifying from that group of people who've been around church maybe 6 months to a year, they could be next. They could be the ones who lead this. They could be the ones who take this on. So I think that even for churches, that's a great opportunity. Absolutely. When you start and you're wanting to start something, it's a great opportunity to go. Because sometimes we just look around the circle, we've got, well, who can do that? Rather than going, no.
That's the issue, isn't it, really?
Let's widen that circle.
And I think one does lead to the other, because if you're a church and you're thinking, let's widen the circle, invite people in, and as Nathan says, in that space then you can see who's going to be next to take on a role. I think if you try and do one without the other, there could be complications. I think one leads to the other, which is brilliant, and I think it's just fantastic stuff you've been sharing. Do you think you've really nailed it on the sense of the integrated church? Anything you want to say on that? Because we've got a few quick fire questions we want to ask you.
Well, I think the only thing I would say is that we, in one sense, just for my own mind, and I'm not sure, whether listeners would agree or you guys would agree, but I wished I had a better phrase than integrated church, but I can't think of a better phrase. I
like it.
Well, good. That's all right.
What about you?
We've heard it that many times that it's ingrained into my brain now.
But I think as well, I've got that triangle where that I show people where they all connect together.
That's right.
And so I think when you see integrated in that context, that we're attractional and we're communal and we're intimate and we're attractional, and they all interlock and interconnect. I think you get the idea. It's integrated. It's all ours.
But if somebody has a better name and they want to fire it our way,
send it through.
Or steal it, make it better.
Steal it, make it better. Happy for them.
Then do a podcast on it, and then we'll take it back.
Do that. So we've got a few quick fire questions.
Great.
Paul, that's been brilliant so far, and we're so pleased you've been on today because, as we said earlier, it's been ages. But a few quick fire questions. Well, you take the first one.
So these are quick fire. So go for it quick. If you could write a book, what would the subject be?
So I'd have to write 2 books. One would be about the church, because I've been passionate for the church for years, and the other would be about overcoming mental strongholds, which has been a bit of a personal journey. So there'll be 2 books.
Very good. And then on the subject of books, what is your favourite leadership book of all time?
Apart from the Bible.
Apart from the Bible. Well, my favourite leadership book of all time, I think, it's a hard question, but I'm going to say that one I really loved was Axiom by Bill Hybels, just because they were memorable, little pithy statements, and the chapters were about a page and a half, etc. But the fact that it was memorable and they were clear, so that was one of my favourites.
Love it.
Great. What is the one type or piece of food you would not want to live without? What's your first meal in heaven going to be? That's a good question.
That's a good question.
Yes, it's a Reuben sandwich. which is pastrami, pickles.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a sandwich.
Where's that from then? Is that American?
So it is American, but like I think Jewish roots in terms of the deli, Jewish
pastrami,
delis. I think. Yeah.
Oh, I love pastrami. You're making me hungry. Okay. So, and your dream destination would be to visit. Where would that be?
I think South America, because I've not been to South America, so I'd like to do that.
What about for you, Nathan?
So I have two: Fiji for the super relaxed destination, and then South America as well. But it would be very different. It would be a football ground tour.
I would be going for the steaks. I think that's what we'd be going for.
Yeah.
I'd go to Japan. I'd like to go to Japan.
Oh yeah, Japan's
wow.
Japan.
Yeah. And then I think I know this. Your favorite movie and why?
Gladiator.
How many times you watched it?
Well,
hold on. You know, how many times did you watch it in that season? 13.
When it first came out, I watched it within the first year, I think, about 13 times. It just had everything for me. It had the story, the tension, the hero, and I mean, I could quote at times back then, when it first came out, I could quote large swales of it, just because I'd watched it that many times. And most used movie for sermon illustrations for me, anyway, I guess.
Yeah.
What about you then, actually?
Oh, best movie would be Godfather.
Oh, mine is The Bourne Identity.
Oh,
I love the Bourne movies. Or The Matrix. One of the other.
Great. I guess people can connect with you, Instagram, at Paul Benger.
Yeah.
That's the best way for people to connect.
Yeah, best way, at Paul Benger.
Yeah. Great. Well, that's been a wrap. It's been great to be together on this episode of the Church Explained podcast. Thanks for listening. And if you could rate, review, share, subscribe, wherever you're listening to this content, then please do that. Also, don't forget to head on over to icon.church/open and you can get access to loads of free content.
Let me just say that before we wrap up now. Icon Open, we're having so many people hit the website.
Fantastic.
Great.
In fact, just to let listeners know, like since it's launched last year, we've had probably over 55,000 people or leaders looking for content. So you could be one of them, couldn't you?
Yeah, exactly. There's loads of free content out there and loads of stuff for you and your church. But that's it for now.
That's it.
It's been great to be together, and we'll see you next time on the Church Explained podcast.
Brilliant.